If you're on YouTube right now, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future episodes. And drop a like and a comment. Thank you. So what made you decide that the UPS store is going to be the best model, for you guys to spend your capital and your time on?
Gosh, like most things in life, it's been like random. Like it was so random that it kind of happened. This was the end of 2020. We had the eviction moratorium, and I didn't really have much exposure. The only tenant I had that had 100% guaranteed income is the only person who tried to take advantage of that situation. But when I was doing that, because I had been in this, this path that always told me like, hey, you make your money, you can pick up a house each year kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing you know, you have a bunch of paid off real estate. And then all of a sudden I was like, well, this cash flow is not, it could be upended in a way that I didn't appreciate. And I had a small business before. We had I remember Fit Right that was up here on Forsyth. That was
Mm-hmm.
It was a running shoe store.
Oh, yes.
But we had a timing company on the side. So the guy that owned that store, he and I had a separate joint venture that kind of leaned on that. And it was like the early stage RFID chips that they were using to time a lot of these 5Ks, triathlons, and things like that. And so I'd had a small business before, actually sold it, made a little bit of money off of it. It helped pay for my next house kind of thing. And so I was like, man, I said, maybe I should just get back into like some kind of small business. And I'd also, I was going through a stage in my life too, where I was kind of like starting to think like, hey, there's different things that are possible. And at the same time, this thing that I thought was stable may not be stable. And so I said, let me look at some businesses. Maybe buying I kind of heard the idea that, you could buy a business, and I never really thought about it. And then I was starting to look at it, and I was like, man, these prices relative to earnings is actually pretty crazy. I mean, because in full disclosure, I paid a little bit over $300 for my store, and it was a store that was for sale by an existing owner. Owner was actually going through health issues, and it was like $300. Let's say $350 for round numbers. I'm like, I cannot buy a $350,000 property that's going to net me what this does. And I'm an engineer by trade, so I'm a systems guy. So I'm like, and I wanted a franchise because I wanted something that had some built-in support. So I knew I was going to still have a day job. I was going to hire a manager and kind of manage a manager. And I was looking at it, and I was just like, I want something that has systems, and this was available. And I liked it because as a real estate investor, I could never register an LLC to a P.O. box. I always had to register it to my house. The UPS store here in Monroe, I had all my mail going to there because I could register that business to that address, which is what I liked about it. That was literally here's why I like UPS. It was that one piece there. And I came in at the tail end of COVID when everybody was shipping everything. So UPS stores had really good valuations at that point. They're still steady, but they're not on the crazy trajectory they were at the end of 2020. I bought that one at the end of 21. Would have bought it a little bit sooner, but the owner passed away in the middle of that. He knew he was only in his early 50s, but he had I think he had some version of ALS, if I remember correctly. And in fact, I never actually met him. That shows how this was going. We were negotiating, and I was working with a broker through UPS. And the time we were going to meet, they said, hey, he could only write at that point. And then by the time we went to meet, it was like, hey, he's not going to be able to. We're going to have to really step in and try to figure it out. And they were trying to get it to where he set up his estate to where it could all transfer and things like that, but didn't even get that done in time. So
Right.
we had to go through succession and all that kind of stuff to the point where I almost walked away from it. And now I'm, because I was like, I'm one of those people like it seems like everything has to be hard, but you can make it where it's a lot easier if you just give yourself all these different pieces of support. But my first time on everything is just always painful. My first rental property that I had was here in the Garden District, and it flooded 3 months after I turned into a rental property, and then that tenant sued me for it. And then I figured out that my flood insurance was an escrow, and the bank didn't pay my flood insurance. And
man.
So I mean, everything I do the first time is terrible, and then after that, it gets a lot easier.
So how, you just told us that you're 40. So you've been doing this for some time. At what point in your life did you feel that entrepreneur spirit to where you wanted to kind of step out and try to create instead of just assimilate?
I'd say, I was raised with my grandparents in Jackson Parish, and it was my grandpa was like, you got to go to school and you got to work hard, so you don't have to go work in these paper mills like I've done. So I went to school, I worked real hard, and I got to go work in paper mills. But I didn't. And funny, I went and seen him yesterday. He's 93. He'll be 94 in January, and he still talks to me about plants, even though I'm not working in many plants these days. And he was still actually really proud that was where I went because I was one of the bosses, and because I went to school and I just took a different route. But it was just like, hey, you have to go out there. You have to kind of get a good education because he had like a third or fourth grade education. He had his dad was real sick, and he was one of those that he was the oldest boy, had to kind of support the family,
Right.
and so you just had to go and just try to earn your way to security, and that was the approach that I had. And somewhere probably in my mid-20s, I worked with a guy. So I worked in the plants, and he was a machinist, and he was the one guy that everybody was like, man, Brad's over there doing weird stuff. And what Brad was doing was just buying real estate. But, and he may be over there working on a lathe, cutting a piece of thing, but, he's taking a call, dealing with some property he has or something. And he was the first person that really ever talked to me about, like, man, there's a completely different way. And so that was the first piece. And then I said, I kind of got in this rhythm of like, hey, if you just keep acquiring properties, you can ultimately get to a spot where, and I was fortunate that, I worked in a manufacturing is a profession that pays really well. If you, if you're willing to work the hours and I've had a lot of things that went my way for sure. But when I was in college, I was the only person I knew in college that took a pay cut when they got out of college. Because I've been working hourly for so long, and I was working a lot of hours through college. I remember my last year working hourly at the plant, I was making like 70 grand, and this was in 2007. And I took my first my salary job out of college. I was making like 59 or 60. But I knew it was a step that I had to
Sure.
take to order to go do the other stuff. But I was like the only one that knew that. But I knew that manufacturing was a path to it. And so I was like, hey, I just keep adding this, and this is my path to financial freedom. And if you get enough of these, and I remember even thinking it sounded like, man, I need 50 or whatever the number may need to be to get to like 10 grand a month or something. And, I just knew that I had to just earn my way out of it. It was kind of the way I was thinking of it. So, with that being said, I've always loved working. And
So, kind of back up just a little bit. Your first, I guess, kind of entry into the entrepreneurial world was purchasing residential real estate
yes,
to be able to rent out. Was it as easy as you thought it would be, or was it a little more complicated than what you anticipated it being?
it was definitely a little more complicated. It was one of those things like, if you have one real property, you have a job.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the thing that it took me a little bit of time to figure out because, if you only have one, it only takes one window unit, one bad plumbing repair to just wipe out any money you made that month. And next
That's
thing you know,
correct.
you're like, why in the world am I doing this? And that's when people ask me about that today, like, hey, should I be in it? I'm like, gosh, I'm not sure. I mean, between the interest rates and just the CapEx risk, I mean, if you're going to do it, there's going to be, you need some margin.
It's a commitment.
It's a major commitment.
It's easy to sit back and look at somebody that is that you perceive as doing well.
Yeah.
But the thing that you don't see is their off hours, how much time they're having to commit to it, or financially how much they're not really making because of all of these things that they're having to do behind the scenes. And people ask me all the time, well, Brian, well, I want to get out and start buying houses and I want to have a, real estate empire. And I said, that's great, but let's make sure that you're prepared for that. Nowadays, when I see the investors that are looking for what we call cash flow properties, that really the property's only worth what it's going to be bringing in each month, are busting their humps so much harder than the people that are buying what I like to call as equity properties that are going to continue to rise in value. Their margins may be a little bit closer. They're not making as much per property, but that house is gaining value every single month, and they're having much fewer phone calls because the property is better maintenance than some of these cash flow properties. So I think that anybody looking to get into residential real estate, I think it's an awesome way to be able to grow your net worth, but you need to do your homework because jumping into it, I mean, it can cost you some serious money. And that same thing could be said for people that are wanting to flip houses. Our market is we're not the Austin to where you're getting, 20% returns every year in growth. There are good deals that are to be had, but you better know what you're doing when it comes to rehabbing that property. You'll end up upside down before you know it.
Yeah, I mean, if you do any of this long enough, you're going to have some bad days, and
Right.
you've got to kind of figure out like, hey, going in, if what's going to happen if I have to spend 15 grand on a roof, or
Right.
hey, if the basement gets flooded or something like that. I mean, because if you don't have that answer, you're eventually you will get to answer that question.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not trying to paint a picture saying that it's bad and you shouldn't do it. I think it's great, but my caution to everyone that wants to get in on at least the real estate side of things is, um, man, go visit with someone who's already doing it and doing it at a high level, and ask the questions. What are some things you wish you would have known before you got into it that you had to learn the hard way, just so that you don't make those mistakes?
I think the most important thing that I do today, just between all the things I'm involved with and everything, is just trying to figure out how to manage risk.
Mm.
And that's more when we have those cautionary tales. It's not to say, hey, you shouldn't do this. It's like, no, I just want you to understand. You should know what your upside. Everybody knows what the upside is. We have the formulas, the spreadsheets. Here's what I can make per door, all that kind of stuff. We know what the upside is. We don't do a great. I still struggle at times to truly
Yeah.
quantify the downside.
So residential real estate, you got your feet wet in it. How many houses or properties did you build up to? And then did you ever scale back on some of that?
Yeah, I got up to like 14, 15, maybe it was 16. I sold a couple in the last couple of years. Just the valuations were silly to me because if and I even flipped a couple of them, like stuff that I normally would have bought for a rental, but I just did this math and I said, hey, if I can get 10 years worth of income, pro
Mm-hmm.
forma income at once, I just take it. Because I eliminate all the risk. Like I said, half my job these days is just managing risk. And I take that off the table. So we had some properties that had appreciated to a point where, I just look real hard. Any single family, for example, I look real hard where it is whenever it comes off lease. Like, hey, does this one still make sense? Am I getting a good return on my equity? If I've got $60,000 or $100,000 in this property,
Right.
if I'm only making $100 a month, am I getting the best return? Is it better put into a different venture, or is it something I should roll into a different property?
So after you uh, started heading down the path of residential real estate, when did you start looking at other types of investments?
So early on, I've been one of these guys who's, had like a love-hate relationship at times with work. And what I mean by that is like, I'm prone to ride the waves. I've had times where, I remember when I had my first like major job out of college and, I put all myself into that to the point where, whenever the company went through financial troubles, it ultimately ended up filing bankruptcy and I left just before it did. But I had a lot of my self-worth in it. And that was a really eye-opening experience because like, hey, I am this guy. I'm this type of manager. That's who I am. And then when you have so much of your identity tied to that, there was a correction that was coming whenever all of a sudden you go do something different.
So let's park on that for a second because I think you hit on something that um, a lot of entrepreneurs have that mindset, or maybe mindset's not the right word, that fall into that trap. I think a trap is a better way of putting it, of where you find your identity and where you put your identity at. Because, one hiccup in the economy, a life status change, you name what could actually happen. And if you have all of your identity in this one thing, man, you're setting yourself up for huge risk
For sure.
at that point. Huge risk.
Yeah, for me, it was like I said, it's like identity crisis. Okay, like, well, who am I now? What am I? That's what I felt like my success was tied into, and honestly, it was like a lot of the crazy things that have ever happened to me, or things that were negative at the time. They were some of the best things that ever happened to me because I wasn't focused on my fitness. I wasn't focused on my relationships. Probably was doing maybe okay as a dad at the time, and so it was one of those things where, well, maybe I should kind of explore some other things, maybe. And I took a different job and also was just kind of doing some stuff on the side. That's when we had the timing company. So started it, really enjoyed it. It was something that I really liked to do. It was, at least in the iteration that I had at the time, it was never going to be the thing that replaced my W-2 income. but it was something I could do on the side. It made extra money. It was definitely a time in my life where kids were getting older. I could use the extra money kind of thing, but it was just a lot of fun. But I also got to the point with it. So I was like, okay, I got a day job. I've got this side hustle. It's a lot of fun. I'm making good money doing it. And then all of our timing events. So if you ever do a 5K or a marathon or anything like that, it's on a weekend. All of a sudden, my kids got to this age
Mm.
where all of a sudden I'm trading weekends. Like, hey,
Yeah.
yeah, you made some money, but did you make it to the soccer game? And so I brought some crews on and stuff to try to help, but it all of a sudden it wasn't making as much sense because now my kids had stuff all the time. And I'm like, well, this was for a season in life, and this doesn't make sense anymore. Because I read this article. I send this article to more people than any other, and I think this actually came later, but I had a version of this epiphany at the time. And it's called The Tail End. It's written by Tim Urban, and he says, if you take your life and you put it on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and you put a little block for every week, you can actually fit every week of your life if you're going to live till 90 on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and it makes you think life is very linear. Like, hey, if I eat a pizza every week and I'm 40 years old, I'm going to live to 90, then hey, I know exactly how much pizza I've got left. I know how many pork dumplings, I know how many Super Bowls I've got left to watch. And the guy did the math and he said, but not everything is like that. And he was a guy who lived in Boston, I think, and he went off to school and then he kind of moved away. And he said, I went from being parents every day, every day, every day, every day, all of a sudden to once every 4 months, once every 3 or 4 months, and all of a sudden once every 6 months. And he said he exhausted 87% of the face-to-face time he'd ever had with his parents by the time he was 18 years
Mm.
old. He said, I'm in the tail end. So it's this big tail end distribution. And to me, it was the epitome of what I was doing. I remember there was a point where, when you have your kids, I started counting down. I do these quarterly reviews of myself. I've been doing these for probably 10 plus years. But I literally would write down how many weekends I have left with the kids at home. It was a really eye-opening moment for me. And so once I did that, it became really easy to sell that business. It just didn't make sense anymore. But yeah, the thesis of that article is the proximity you live to the people you care about matters. And also just the amount of time you spend with these people matters. So if I live closer to my children, then I'm going to get to see them more.
Right.
It's part of why I got on city council. Thinking about that whole piece before, like, hey, if I want my kids to live close to me, then ultimately I have to make a world or try to help contribute to a world that makes it easier for them to stay here. So yeah, I sold that business. Ultimately turned it into more real estate. And so when I did that, it was one where I said, hey, we had a flood. There's some pain here with that. But kind of went through, I was doing well in my career. I'd kind of went back into a different cycle where, hey, I was really into my day job again. I was doing really well. And then like when COVID happened, I think all of us had too much time on our hands. I was definitely one of those as well. And I just remember thinking, I watched the eviction moratorium, like, well, okay, this path I'm on, does it really make as much sense as I think it does? Is it stable as it should be? And I kind of had an itch for it too. Because I was watching friends of mine, I was in a W-2 that was stable. I mean, I worked. I never missed a date. I mean, we just got just full disclosure, we just gotten bonuses just before all this happened. We were fine. But I had so many friends that were entrepreneurs who,
Yeah.
didn't have that kind of lifeline and who didn't, that weren't able to work and things. And just to me, the instability of it all was an opportunity for me to reset it.
So when you, at what point did you start looking at the UPS store as a viable business option for you? I think you mentioned you went through the UPS store broker type system to locate one for you. What put you on that path?
Yeah, I'd love to say it was this major due diligence and things like that, but I had a positive experience with the one that I dealt with. I had one locally available. I looked at it from an earnings standpoint. I was looking at the different list. I mean, it's definitely highly rated. I think it's consistently in the top 5 of Forbes recommended franchises. So I was looking for systems. I was looking for things that, hey, I could still do this and maybe create a runway to eventually live my W-2 and scale it in a way that I could straddle the fence. And I said I liked the trajectory it was on.
Why were you wanting to straddle the fence?
Because for me, it was I still felt like even if I brought one in, it wasn't going to be enough to like completely replace my income, kind of thing. And I still really liked what I did too. It was a lot of times, and this is something I struggle with, is like I don't get rid of enough stuff. I'll take on too much. I'll be the guy with all the spinning plates, and eventually you'll break some plates. And I've constantly had to try to recalibrate that. But that was part of it. I mean, I've wondered before, even today, still with the W-2 and a bunch of side ventures. It's like, what if I just went all in on one
Yeah, and
thing?
that's my question: is what's preventing you from going all in? You're the um, by all appearances, you've got the drive, you've got the motivation, you have the intellect, you have the connections. Um, you're a I'm going to win kind of person. If I'm going to do it, we're not going to do it halfway. We're going to do it right. We're going to make sure we have all the systems in place, and we're going to make it happen. Why are you still straddling that fence?
I think, unlike a lot of people, I'm still, and I say, you're searching for security, and security is really an illusion. We're all as secure as our ability to produce.
I agree with that.
And for me, I still like all the things. So it's not like I'm not running from a job. Any of the jobs even I had in the last 5, 6, 7 years are not things I'm running from. I mean, I'm running to something. For me, like there's like everybody else, there's a number too. I'm also in that expensive stage of life where there's overhead. I got about to be 3 kids going through versions of post high school, and so yeah, that number's changing.
Yeah.
But the short version right now is I'm still enjoying all of it. It's there will be a breaking point. Let's say you get to a third UPS store or something like that, then I'll probably have to say, okay, this is where I have to either push and just go all the way in, and have to let something go, like put one of the plates down instead of continue to spend more.
So when if you were mentoring someone that's wanting to that has an entrepreneurial spirit and they want to start a business, kind of where would you start with them? They don't know anything, but you can see that they have the drive. They want to learn. They want to step out and make something happen. What kind of steps would you tell them to take, for the first couple of steps? Where would you direct them?
The first advice I give most people that are, especially young people that are thinking about this, is, find that person that you see that you want to be 10 years in the future. Somebody who's already doing what you're wanting to do. If it's a real estate investor, if it's somebody who has a consulting business, or they're just at this stage of their career, they're, upper level manager, whatever it may be, but find that person, because, we hear this a lot, and I find it to be absolutely true, is like you do become the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah, I wish more people could actually understand that. It's so interesting to be able to see someone outside of their circle and their suffering in areas, and then you get to see who they're surrounding themselves with, and you're like,
Yeah,
I see why they're suffering.
absolutely. I mean, my daughter's 20, and we had this conversation recently, and it was like one of those late night conversations, like, hey, if you had to redo anything parenting, what's the one thing that sticks out? I said, and I've come to this conclusion over the last probably couple of years, and I said, if I had to change one thing, I would have been incredibly intentional about your friend groups. I would have been friends with parents I didn't like or whatever, because if I thought those kids were the right ones for you to be around, because that's the one thing that I didn't appreciate enough. I mean, we're always trying, like, hey, if that's a bad kid, we don't hang out with this kid and that kind of stuff. But the other side, that's the reactive version. The proactive version is like, well, I would make sure you were part of this group, or you hang out with these people. And I'm not sure exactly how clean or polished that is, but I would have approached it completely different.
Yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from on that. We want to give our kids the ability to self-discover life. We don't want to be the puppet master of everything. But man, if we can have influence on who their circle is, I think it's a difference maker on how a kid's going to get their first step, how they're going to get their first start into the real world. It's because they're learning how to build relationships, and building those relationships. Are they building the right relationships or the wrong relationships? So that is hugely important.
Yeah, so I think that's important for young business people, or people who want to find their way into it. Always encourage people to find ways to just fail really fast. I mean, ways that you scuff your knees instead of break your leg. So it's these almost, I don't know if I'd call it just conservative. It's not really a conservative effort, but it's kind of like the thing I talked about earlier. It's like limiting your downside.
Yeah.
I don't want to go in a way that I lose everything or lose my home or whatever if I do this. But, when you're young, you just don't have the overhead. You don't have all of these things that are tying you down, and you can afford to be risky. You don't want to be 50 and figuring that out.
Yep.
And you can do it at 50, but you're going to measure risk differently.
Absolutely.
So
And
that's my number piece of advice.
The consequence a lot of times when you're 50, making those decisions can have a greater impact, negative impact, than when you're 20 making those same types of decisions. Can you point back to times in your entrepreneurship, getting to the point we're at right now, of mistakes that you've made that you wish you could have go back and change, that you would like to share with someone young, up and coming?
Yeah. The one thing I've learned, whether through my own ventures or even in corporate, is, so we talk about the people, keep going back to the people in our life. And really that is a big piece of it. I've always, if you should get somebody out, whether it's firing, get somebody, whether it's cutting a customer or a vendor loose, you just need to do it so much faster. I've had managers that worked for me, or people that I had on staff and things before, that once I got them away, you realized the cancer. You probably didn't appreciate the level of cancer they were.
Yeah.
Or I've had different managers at the store, for example, and first, like, we went through this period where we were trying to be stable and just kind of keep everything going, and then figure out some things. We should all really just hire slow and fire fast.
Yeah.
That's the first thing, because that's the one that I keep sticking with, because every personnel change I've had to do over time, I've always wished I did it sooner. And honestly, not even for me. I'll tell you what, my wife and I, we were at a hotel in Baton Rouge here probably about a year and a half ago. And there was a gentleman who, he ultimately ended up quitting, but we were in the process of probably terminating, in a different spot in my career. And then we run into, and I've kept in touch with him. We just kind of texted back and forth, and so he comes up to me, hugs me. Jennifer doesn't know him, and like, hey, who is that? I said, well, that's somebody I had to let go a couple of years ago. If you want to get like really into the weeds of it, I said, but he's somebody I've kept in touch with, and that's what he needed at that time too. He wasn't happy there. And it was not the highest and best use of him. And for both of us to be able to kind of be several years removed from it and still care about each other, still root for each other, you'll find that you don't find the guy that's been, 10 years later is like, man, I really wish I would have still been at this place where we both were butting heads and just not winning.
How do you manage the fact? So, and I agree with you, fire fast, hire slowly. How do you put yourself, as a leader in your W-2 life and in your business world, how do you position yourself as a leader to where you're not micromanaging, but you're creating a culture that people want to strive to achieve the best that they can without you having to micromanage?
Yeah, so probably Doug through about age 30 was probably a major micromanager, because like when I was in the first plant I was in, I worked most every position in that plant through college, and then I became a manager, helped do expansions in other plants similar, did M&A activity. And so I was young and obnoxious at times too, I'm sure, but you couldn't tell me anything because I'd already done it. And that was, so, and when you're, that's a very kind of intoxicating feeling to, hey, I could do all this stuff and nobody else can, kind of thing. And which is just absolutely not true, but you tell that story to yourself, so for me, I lived through that where I was that person. And, and then I just, some of it's maturity, some of it's no longer being the youngest, smartest guy in the room. And we hear this a lot, you should never be the smartest guy in the room.
But it takes maturity to recognize that.
It takes time. It all depends on how you got there too. If you were the one who was pulling a lot of the weight, then you just don't appreciate the ones who don't. And we all have our different levels of drive, ambition. So yeah, I've had a hard time getting there, especially through my 20s and 30s. Once I got to about 30, once I got to like where I was like a upper level manager, I realized that I just couldn't be that person. Also, I kind of switched locations, so no longer was I the guy who ran all the machines.
Right.
So it forced me to let go of that piece. I mean, I still go in the UPS store today, and there's still some basic things they do every day that I don't know how to do.
Right.
There's some end of the day reporting. I know what the numbers are, and I'm like, well, hey, how do you? I don't even want to learn how to run the report. Like, hey, it's theirs, and plus, it's actually funny for them to be able to say they know how to do something I don't.
Yeah.
But when I was like 30 or so, and that was where I was in my career, I'd got to that point where I realized that like you cannot do this all yourself. You can't, and it was just so much easier once I finally learned to let go. And I actually probably switched. The pendulum kind of swung the other way. And I had a highly qualified team too. At like one of these stops where I'm really thinking about it, where I just learned to get the right people in, empower them to make decisions. Let's focus on the high level goals. And I'm going to lean in and help and support. And some of it's, hey, my technical know-how. Hey, I can help you get there. Some of it's like, hey, how do I get the resources for you? And that's been a much more rewarding version of it, because I also learned, like in my career, once you get to like a certain level of management, you can't go to the next thing until you really have somebody to replace you. I mean, I remember being in plant life, like, hey, you want to be a plant manager here, but what's going to happen? I can't pull you out of here and create this vacuum. So if you create a situation where your employees constantly rely on you for stuff, then you've actually not served them very well.
Yeah.
I had a plant that I used to be at. So I've been plant manager of plants, manufacturing plants. I've done all this different stuff. But I remember one of the places I was a plant manager for, I was like my third day there, and I had my operations manager, who's essentially the second in command for the plant. And he comes to me, he's like, hey, should we do this step here? And I'm like, what do you mean? And he starts telling me about it. I was like, wait a minute, that's not even your call. I said, that's actually a supervisor call. They own this shift. That's their call. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? I said, no, I'm not. That's not even your decision. I said, but I'm not giving you a decision. Yes, that's yours to make. And, most of these plants are on 24/7. They're 2 12-hour shifts. And I remember just telling my guys, like, there's 14 shifts a week here. 7 days a week, 2 shifts, 14 shifts. I said, I'm here at best 5, Monday through Friday, or day shift. I said, but if I'm at corporate today, so next day I'm 4 shifts. So any decision in the daily operations that hinges on me is a bad format. And that's the one thing that we, especially those of us that are scaling and growing, that we all follow the level of our systems. If, everybody, my favorite thing, because we're in December right now, you'll see it coming soon, we're going to do New Year's resolutions, and people are going to change their, hey, I'm going to have this morning routine. I'm going to do these 7 things every morning. And what people forget is they actually have a morning routine. If your morning routine is to roll out of bed and get everybody out the door in 15 minutes, that is your routine. You do have a routine now. So it's important to know that that is your system. And if you want different results, you have to change your systems.
Right.
And it has to be systems, because it has to happen when you're gone. So I taught those 14 shifts. If I want that stuff to happen on the other, 9 that I'm not there, it has to be systems.
Well, it's I find it very eye-opening when you watch a leader that hasn't empowered their people to make decisions, when they finally learn that, hey, I don't have to be here 100% of the time. All I have to do is empower the right people, train them, give them the boundaries of where their decision-making is at. And you can really see people just start to flourish at that point, because the average person is going to be at their job more than they are with their family in the waking hours. And we all like to think that everything is based on pay. My whole existence is how much can you pay me? While pay matters, if you can find someone that's going to have an enjoyable day at work, feel like they're accomplishing something, you're going to have an employee that is going to be around for quite some time, because it's not always about pay. You can have some of the highest paid individuals and have a crappy work environment, and you're not going to keep them very long. Now, you could have a great work environment, crappy pay. I mean, there's got to be a balance with that. But I have found, it's been my experience, that when you empower people the right way, you give them the tools and the training they need, you let them be a part of the process, you have a much more productive work life.
For sure. I think that, I've taken pay cuts over years when ultimately those things served me. And, and because you can go make incredible money doing all kind of awful stuff if you want to go travel. And I say awful stuff that depending on where you're at in your station of life. I mean, like up until like the last year, I mean, I've traveled 150 nights a year, most every year for probably the last 4 or 5. And then, I had my crash a couple of years ago, and I just don't want to travel like that anymore. So that matters more to me. And, I can tell, I've told some of these young guys, because I deal with a lot of guys in trades. I mean, like, look, if you want to go make a bunch of money, we'll get on the road. Now, if you have young kids and you have things like that, there is an incredible trade-off that, hey, I wished I'd made that trade-off sooner.
Yeah.
And everything has a price.
It does.
You have to just always remember that. I mean, nothing's free, and you're always compromising, and it's okay to make the choice. I mean, not everybody gets to go to every baseball game, and that's just, at the end of the day, you just have to just make choices that align with your values and the season of life you're in, too.
Yeah, and I think that's important to recognize the season of life. And again, go back to it's much easier for someone to take more risk in their 20s than it is for someone to take some of the same type of risk when they're in their middle age, 40s, 50s. So getting back to small businesses, how important do you feel like it is to really have a connection within the community, to get to know who's in the community and what's working, what's not working?
For me, I'm a relationship person, and so to me, it's easy to kind of lean into the things that I like. But to me, like if I don't have a relationship with you, then it's very easy to commoditize everything. You make price-based decisions, but sometimes you have to have like the connection with you, whether it's with like if you're this store owner or if you're this venture and your team. The example I like to give is like for example, at our UPS store right now, some of the guys, some of the customers will give me crap. They'll be like, "Hey, what are you doing here today?" Because I'm not there every day.
Right.
But I've got all kinds of cookies and stuff. They've brought my employees. They bring them stuff for Halloween. They send me messages about them talking to kids about Santa. I mean, and that's a connection they have with my employees. My employees went to a different store that did the same thing. A lot of my customers would probably follow my employees. That's a real thing, and I'm glad that exists because that shows what they do. That shows the connection they've made, and hopefully everybody graduates from working with me into a greater thing, or they find something that works really well with us and makes them happy. I mean, that's to me, that's what's important. So for me, obviously, I'm connected in the community, but I think that at the end of the day, I like to do business with people. I like to support people that I enjoy being around, and I feel are also supporting my community because, I can always go find something cheaper. That's very easy. You can go get on Amazon. You can go price shop, and you can spend all this energy doing it. But I mean, when I've got to go get tires today for my vehicle, and I could go tire shop, and ultimately I just spend money with people I like.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for you to make that connection. It's important because at the end of the day, I mean, I can't remember the name of the book, but it'll hit me later. But it was a Jewish rabbi who wrote the book, but he was talking about ultimately us giving each other money and goods and services are really ways of saying I appreciate you. I appreciate what you've done for me.
Yeah.
And these are all just certificates of appreciation. And that's the way I think about it. And so if you want ultimately people to make that connection with people, you have to be out there. You go to the chamber events, you go and support the different, whether it's baseball teams or whatever, because, a lot of these things don't happen without it.
No, I completely agree with you. But I also think it's important to understand that we're not out there to, I too believe in the relationship aspect of it. And it's not the relationship aspect of it that I'm going to make a relationship with you so that you use me for every real estate transaction you do from here on out. I believe in trying to add as much value as I can to the people I come in contact with on a daily basis. I want to get to know you. I want to know how I can serve you because at the end of the day, I think you said it best. I mean, people show their appreciation on how they spend their money, right? And I also agree with you that we have connections and we know where we can go to get the cheaper product, but we know that we're not doing the overall community good or the people within our circle if we're not investing in the people that are in our circle. If I spend $200 more over here, it's better spent for me knowing that I'm helping someone out that I know is also of the same mindset that's community based, that's trying to do right by their people, and it's not all about saving that ultimate dollar. Now, it doesn't mean say that we got to be cautious with our money, and
Yeah.
we just can't go and buy goods and services that are so far out of sight just to help a friend. But I do think it's important that we don't necessarily assign a value on the things, and that value is just monetary.
I think that ultimately where you spend your money, my grandpa told me this a long time ago. He said, if you show me your calendar and you show me your budget, I'll show you what you care about.
Yeah.
And
And that's scary sometimes. If you really sit back and think and you doing a self evaluation, you want to get your feelings hurt really fast, take some time and look at that.
yeah, I mean, I've had like some really tense conversations over that comment before because, when I was a maintenance planner in a paper mill once upon a time, and I had a manager who was, he wouldn't come to my outage meetings, and that's where you spend all your major maintenance. And so we had this outage that went over budget on time, and we spent too much money. He doesn't come to my meetings, but then whenever it comes time to critique it, we had like this essentially this after action review that we would do each outage. And finally, I told him, I said, look, you don't come to my meetings. You don't come be part of the outage. I said, you don't actually care about this until it actually reaches your radar. And he's like, well, that's not true. And I used that phrase my grandfather gave me. And he's like, well, that's not how it is. I said, I disagree. Because if you do show me your budget and you show me your calendar, I will show you exactly what you care about. And, well, it's kind of like the whole compromise. Like, hey, you may have made a choice. Hey, I really say I want to go to all the baseball games, but if I go do this instead, that's a choice. It's okay because you do care about that. And so it's anyway, I look at that. I mean, because, where you do spend your money and where you do spend your time ultimately is a vote in the kind of community you're creating too. There's certain businesses we go to, and sometimes like it's kind of like the cookie places or let's say whatever food venue my wife likes and maybe I don't like, but I want these places to exist, so we go do that. We've kind of taken that approach with a lot of things. Like, hey, if I want things to like this to exist here, if I want to be able to buy this locally, where I could buy it easier, but if I want this convenience, then I do actually have to go spend money there.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about hiring slow, firing fast. Dig into that a little bit. I've made mistakes in the past on hiring fast and firing very slow, and it's cost me a lot of. Let's just throw money out of the equation. It's cost me a lot of heartache, a lot of time, a lot of frustration through that process. When you start looking for a person, how much of your decision making to fill a position is based on knowledge versus attitude?
It's mostly attitude. I mean, there's definitely positions like in the plants and things, where you're definitely making a technical piece. But, if you do this over a series, a couple interviews, I mean, you still really, the technical piece, the knowledge piece, you kind of think, but honestly, it's really hard to, it's really their job not to disqualify them themselves when you're going through that process. I mean, I've had times where I was interviewing instrumentation technicians and I, based on his resume, I thought like, hey, this guy could definitely be here because I could see his background. Actually, the more he talked to me, the more I realized how little he actually did know. And he actually disqualified me. If he'd never said anything about that kind of stuff and just kept it even, I would have never realized it. But for me, it's totally the attitude, because if I even go back to even like UPS or even was buying or procurement, whatever it may be, the technical stuff can be taught. And if it isn't, if that isn't the case, then it's going to be degreed or this certification. So you're going to be able to quantify stuff easily. I have to realize it. I have to figure out if you fit.
Yeah.
That is something I learned. I went to Drax and we were 2 plants going on 3 back like in 2017. I was a plant manager, and I went from being at Graphic, a big paper mill, thousands of employees in the U.S. and more globally. And I remember realizing just how we as a company were drastically different. And when you're that small, you're like 300 U.S. employees. I remember just kind of realizing that during my hiring process. We had one plant we were trying to almost completely staff up from the ground up at the manager level and a few other positions. And it really hit me that I couldn't have high potential people, and this is the way I was describing it to my manager at the time. I said, look, I said, I can only have high potential hires right now if they can take the ball and run with it. I said, I can't actually have somebody that needs a lot of grooming at this stage. I said, because I don't have enough support for them. If I was a graphic, I could, I had enough people and support around them that I could really do a lot of handholding. I said, but the stage we're at, we actually can't do that. They're going to fail because they don't have this huge support system. And that's where we were at the time. It's completely different now. So that's not an indication of the company, but that's just where we were at that growth stage for that plant. And to me, you have to understand what kind of company you are, because if you're not going to be able to, if you're going to throw somebody into the fire and you need them to swim, then they better come with a certain quantity of experience, and they've got to be the person that can handle that. Right. But if, we talked about engineers, I've been, hopefully been in plants and stuff, I've always said that, I needed kind of working engineers in a manufacturing plant. I couldn't have design engineers. Design engineers, if that's the case, I needed to keep them in engineering, have them focused on that type of work. So if I put them in a plant where they're responsible for outage and contractor supervision and that kind of stuff, they're going to fail. It's they're going to, and they may ultimately harden and become steel and make a diamond in that scenario. But it's the hey, no pressure, no diamonds thing. But I also had to try to figure out how to kind of protect people, because when somebody shows up at your door, they've already decided they want to be there. You've actually got to make sure it works. Yeah. So for me, the attitude, the willingness to learn, is the biggest part of it for me.
Having systems already in place before you make that hire, would you say is almost a must?
It's a must. Like I said before, you have a system right now. You just don't realize it. Because if you think you don't, you do. Mm-hmm. And that's actually the most important. I think it's more important to be at that stage and realize it than be at the stage like, hey, I've got some systems, I need to tweak them. That person's kind of working their way through it. But if the person's like, hey, I put them with such and such. And, I do some of that too. Like, hey, I want them with this person, but hey, we're going to have these kind of lists. I want to make sure we learn these 7 things, and then we get to progress to this piece. And it's blurry. It's a roadmap. It is not a prescription.
But I would agree with you that attitude is, if you have someone is trainable, to me, attitude is going to win over somebody that's got all the alphabet soup behind their name. They could be the biggest cancer you could have if they don't have the right attitude. One person with the wrong attitude can take and mess up a whole entire organization pretty much overnight if you're not careful. So the whole hire slow, fire fast, it is very, very true. As we wrap up here, what are some of, if you could narrow down to three things that you think any entrepreneur should address before they step out of that W-2 or invest large sums of money? What are some of the three or four things that you can think of that is going to be kind of key advice you'd like to give someone?
Yeah, for me, I think if I had to give 3 pieces of advice for that person, one is like you need to figure out like how you're taking care of yourself, kind of like your self-care thing. Because being an entrepreneur is really, really lonely. It's at least it is in the beginning. If you get really intentional about it and try to build your group around you, you can fix a lot of that, but you can be on an island. And so for me, I focus a lot just on what I'm putting in. I try to make sure, I'm putting on my oxygen mask first. That's it's a verb. I'm doing it. I'm not great at it. I have to figure that out sometimes because that's important to realize. Because it's entrepreneur. The word's used a lot these days, and it's overused in my opinion. But so if you're thinking about getting out there on your own, you're going to figure out like, hey, how am I gonna go to the well when I'm out there by myself? And some of that's like, I got a friend of mine he's got like a pep talk app he sent to me the other day, and it's actually fantastic. It's like a 6-minute video you can get every day, and it's
what is it?
It's called Pep Talk.
Okay.
I'll have to send you the link after we're done. I love the app, but it's literally just motivational videos. But you need some version of that. You need an accountability group you can lean on, whether it's this, and it's not to be a formal group. If you have a formal group, that's fine, but you need to have like this board of directors of your life that you can lean into.
Yeah. People give you the hard truth.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of times we a lot of times things sound good on paper, and we can rationalize in our head that yes, this is going to be it. But all we're looking at is the upside. We're not looking at the other things that can sneak up behind us and crash everything. So I think that's important. That's a great one.
And people have to do that in a way, and it's a maturity thing. It takes time, but when somebody tells you why they think that, why they wouldn't do it, or why they think the risks are, they're not trying to talk you out of it. But it's like I keep going back to, it's a risk assessment and figuring that part out. Yeah, so I would figure out how to do some version of the healthy check-ins. How do I talk to somebody that's in my field? Find somebody that's 2 hours away, so you're not encroaching on business, or somebody's willing to lean in. I look at stuff like that all the time. I'm always trying to figure out who's already done what I'm trying to do. So yeah, that's the main things for me, is just figure those things out. Figure out like what you're going to do when you have the rainy day. You don't have to have a bunch of cash sitting on hand, but you do need to be prepared to think about it, because the act of planning is most of the time enough to actually keep the bad things away. Unfortunately, when we watch the young man or woman who passes away too soon, usually you'll find the person who didn't have the life insurance and things like that, and the things taken care of. A friend of mine, we've always joked that, like, hey, usually buying life insurance is enough to make sure that some of those bad things stay away. The act of preparing for what it'll be is a lot, because you'll put some of the unease away. So whenever you think about it late at night, because you'll carry a lot of stuff to bed at night. I don't know why. I've always tried to wonder why do you think about these things as you're going to bed? Everybody talks about that, and entrepreneurs are going to struggle with that more than others. But kind of plan for the downside, because it'll be enough of a roadmap to at least give you some comfort.
Yeah, and I don't think I don't think you can over. I think you can over plan. So those listening don't think that I say you have to have everything lined out. One of the biggest hurdles I see a lot of entrepreneurs take is that they don't want to get out of the planning stage. They think everything's got to be just right before I step out. If you're waiting for everything to line up and be just right before you take that step, you're never going to take that step.
Derek Sivers puts it best. He says, if it was all just information, we'd all be billionaires with six-pack abs.
Absolutely.
Because we have all the information to get to both of those.
Yeah, and we have all the information to talk ourselves out of things. Yeah. I think it's, for me, people ask me what I do for a living. I say, well, I sell real estate, because that's what they understand. But truth be told, I don't sell any of these homes. I don't own any of them. What I'm doing is I'm selling my time. And it's what either I can I can use my time well, or I can waste my time. And I don't like wasting a lot of time. I like to serve people. I want people to feel taken care of. But it's time, and we all have to have a dollar value that we put on our time. And either we're going to take it from our family and give it to our customers, or we're going to find a good balance between the two. But my advice to entrepreneurs out there is that come with a plan and surround yourself with good accountability people. And I say, just do it. I mean, one thing that COVID really showed me is that the entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well. And there are so many ways that the American dream can be envisioned or lived out through this, I would say, a world economy that we have at our fingertips. It's not that hard to get out and make something happen. It just it takes some dedication and commitment to your plan to see it through.
Yeah, I do this exercise. There's a great book by Cameron Herold about the vivid vision. It's like where you write this, 3 years in the future, what my life looks like, and ultimately it's a roadmap that you're working toward. Mm. And I review mine each quarter, and ultimately I'm a little bit closer to what that looks like. And so, hey, we're all working towards that American dream. For some of us, that's flexibility and work schedule. Some of us to be able to make sure we're off by 3:00 just to make sure we hit baseball games. And it's different from everyone, but I keep going back to just being really intentional about things. And for me, like if I don't have that, if I don't have some version of my goals or something, it's easy to wander through life. And then next thing you know, as I told her earlier, I have a 20-year-old daughter. It seems like only a year or two ago when she's 4 years old holding my hand in the other side of the car. And it will fly by. And if you do it without intention, you're it's kind of the thing. Like if you don't know where you're going, then anywhere's fine.
I mean, being intentional is a great way of looking at it. How many times do you find yourself, and it happens to me, I try to be intentional, but it does happen to me to where it's just kind of like I'm on autopilot. I'm just allowing life to happen around me. But it's those times that I am intentional that great things tend to happen.
Yeah, for me, I try to look at my goals every week, every Sunday, and everybody needs those checkpoints, those milestones. I mean, I was listening to a video guy I listened to, and he was talking about, he had his one of his goals a couple of years ago was just to review his goals 50 times, so to do it almost every week, and he gave himself the chance to miss it twice. And just going through and reviewing that was enough to kind of remind him where he's going. I mean, I try to write a top 3 every day in my book, like these, and these should back into my weekly goals, which should back into my quarterly goals. It should back into that, because if not, when I miss that for a couple of days, which absolutely happens, next thing you know, it's Tuesday the next week. I'm like, well, crap, where am I at with this? And I drifted.
Yep.
And everybody has a version of kind of getting back into alignment. We talked about the ability just to, what happens when everybody's pulling the same direction. And so for me, it's like, how do I do that? How do I enlist other people in support of these goals and stay centered? Because I find that when I do these things, I get where I'm going. Because ultimately, the people that fail at their goals or don't reach the things they want to, it's not because of negligence or any kind of ill will or anything like that. It's a lot of it's just getting off track.
Yeah.
And life has a way of doing that.
Absolutely.
It's not a character flaw. It's an event.
Had a business coach break it down extremely simple. So I'm very goal oriented. Probably not on your level where I'm reviewing them on a weekly basis, but I know where my goal is. I have an annual goal that I'm trying to hit professionally and personally. But this business coach broke it down really easy about goal tracking. He said, tell me someone who's ever wanted to lose weight that never got on the scale on a daily basis, see where they're at. If you're not checking where you're at, you don't know what you need to really kind of work on at that point. So, and that was just a great way for me to explain to other people when I'm trying to help them with their goals, that if we're not checking in, where are we measuring up? We don't know if we're making progress or not.
Or if you're taking the right action steps. Yeah. I mean, I do my blood work every quarter, for example. And actually one of the hardest things is make sure I only change one variable at a time. And I don't always change just one, or don't change too many variables at a time. And for me, it's like one of those things to where, like, let's say, I've taken a bunch of different supplements and stuff before. I take like a small handful at this stage of my life because I've learned that I can manage migraines and seizures through blood work. And so for me, it's like, that's like the epitome of like, hey, are the things that I'm doing the right things? 'Cause I can do a bunch of things, but everything I'm putting into my actions towards a goal, I have to know if it's helping or not. And so that's what I kind of go back to. I'm like, hey, here's my blood work example. Like, hey, I did this. It was supposed to do this. Nothing really happened. Everything else stayed remotely the same. That probably isn't working. Or I'm willing to do it for one more cycle. Because it's important to realize when the things that you're doing aren't working and just reaching out to others. I've got a guy in Tennessee that we talk about marketing stuff for the UPS store. We were talking about stuff literally last night through email. Like, hey, what are you doing? Here's what I'm doing this last quarter. Here's where I felt like I was winning. What do you think? And it's important to also realize, are the actions you're taking having the right intentions or the right results?
Yeah. If we don't ever check in, we're not going to be on the path we want to be in at. Doug, I appreciate you coming in and just kind of giving us an overview of kind of what entrepreneurship looks like to you, and areas where you feel like you've had some success and areas where you feel like that, I got to back up and head down a little different path. I appreciate what you do with our community. I know that you didn't go into political service to get rich, for the fame, but I do appreciate the path that you're on, trying to reinvest back within our city, our community. So thank you for everything you do, Doug, and thanks for coming in and sharing this with us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for taking the time to watch or listen to this podcast. We really appreciate your involvement. Please leave us a comment, or even better yet, subscribe to this podcast and hit that notification bell so that you can be alerted for every new episode when it hits.